Hello there, dear friends, and welcome once again to the Relaxed Fantasy Review. Today, we're going to be discussing a mechanic that exists within one of the more difficult classes in the game to play, the Sorcerer. Sorcerers are often compared to wizards, and wizards and sorcerers are very, very different. They're both primary casters. They both basically have their spells and that's it. They don't have a whole lot else going on in their class. Wizards have a lot bigger spell list and a lot more spells to choose from and a lot more spells known. Sorcerers are known for only having a few spells. They start the game with two of them, and for the first half of their career from levels 1 through 10, they only get an extra spell every level. They have quite a few cantrips, starting with 4, ending the game with 6. But by the end of the game, a sorcerer will only know 15 spells through all 9 levels. They don't have many spells on their list. Obviously, you can take things like Ritual Caster to enhance this. You can learn spells through feats like Fey Touch, Shadow Touch, and Magic Initiates. But why do sorcerers have so little to choose from? Well, it's because they have a feature that makes all of their spellcasting better, called Metamagic. They have this font of magic welling from within them, which give them sorcery points. They have a number of sorcery points equal to their sorcerer levels. So a level 5 sorcerer has 5 sorcery points, a level 10 sorcerer has 10. And they can use these points to empower their spells through metamagic. Metamagic is a list of 10 features that you can choose from, and you spend your sorcery points when you cast a spell to change the spell in a meaningful way. What I've done here is I've given all 10 of these spells, changing metamagics, a ranking, and I've ranked them from what I believe is the worst to what I believe is the best. And sorcerers only get to choose a couple of these. They get to choose 2 at level 3 when they get metamagics, so you get 2 straight away, and then you get 2 more as the game goes on. So you do not get to pick all the metamagics. And knowing which ones are going to be the most helpful to you in whatever build you're making is important. But before we get into the top 10 list, I wanted to let you know that Relaxed Fantasy Review has memberships. For just $1 a month, you can support the channel and get a little badge next to your name in the comments to let everyone know that you are a big fan of Relaxed Fantasy Review. You'll also earn my undying gratitude. But either way, thank you for watching and thank you for supporting me here on YouTube. So, top 10 metamagics, which is all of them, in what I believe is the best order. Starting with number 10, or the worst on the list, Seeking Spell. Seeking Spell is a metamagic that costs 2 sorcery points. Whenever you cast a spell that uses an attack roll, if you miss, you can spend 2 sorcery points to re-roll the attack roll. This is basically just on-demand advantage on the attack roll-based spells. Problem is that most of the spells in the game that are really powerful don't use attack rolls. They're saving throw-based cantrips. So this is specific to damaging spells, and there's a lot of ways to grant yourself advantage, you know? There's a lot of spells that grant advantage, a lot of effects that grant advantage. And spending 2 sorcery points just to re-roll a single one, and it's not even a true advantage because you have to use the re-roll. So if you roll worse, then you've wasted 2 sorcery points on nothing. So all in all, I wouldn't take Seeking Spell, unless you're building some sort of strange build that specializes in attack roll-based spells, I wouldn't bother. And even then, you're going to be hunting advantage anyway, so I just wouldn't. Now, number 9 on the list, Heightened Spell. A lot of people like Heightened Spell because what it does is this targets saving throws. I just mentioned how a lot of the most powerful spells in the game use saving throws. And whenever you're going to use it on a creature, it forces them to have disadvantage on the first saving throw they make against the spell. So fireball, a hypnotic pattern, whatever, it makes them roll with disadvantage. The downside is twofold. One, it costs 3 sorcery points to do this. And you have to commit before you cast the spell. This isn't something you do after the creature rolls and succeeds. You have to declare heightened spell, then cast, and then one creature, rolls with disadvantage 1 time. This can be tricky when you've got a spell that has multiple opportunities to save. If they make a saving throw at the end of every turn or the start of every turn against your spell effect, they're only going to roll with disadvantage the first time. So this is great for sucker save spells, like a banishment, for example, but it still costs 3 sorcery points, and honestly, I would prefer if it just granted disadvantage to all creatures. So a fireball would be extra powerful, but it's just one creature. That's why I gave it so low on the list. There's just too many caveats. The effect is good, but the caveat list is just too high. Then at number 8, we have Distant Spell. Distant Spell is a cheap one, costs 1 sorcery point, and it doubles a spell's range. Any spell that has a range of 5 feet or greater, when you cast it, it just means you can cast it twice as far. So instead of shooting firebolts 120 feet, you're shooting at 240 feet. Instead of a fireball having, range of 60, it's got a range of 120, or instead of 120, it's got 240, whatever. If a spell has a range of 10 feet, you double it to 20 feet. If a spell has a range of 30, you double it to 60. You get the point. What's actually interesting about this spell is that it has a specific caveat to touch-based spells. What I think of here is Shocking Grasp and acid and Poison Spray. You see, Poison Spray is a cantrip that has a range of 10 feet. Shocking Grasp is a cantrip that has a range of touch. You have to touch someone to electrocute them or spray poison gas at them. Distant Spell means Poison Spray will go 20 feet instead of 10, but Shocking Grasp will jump all the way to 30 feet, which I find kind of funny. It's not terrible. My only complaint is that most battlefields aren't that big. Like, yeah, if you're fighting in a big open field and you're trying to shoot creatures far away, fair enough. Throw out a distant spell, throw out a magic missile or a scorching ray, and fire a bunch of shots at range. It'll actually be fine. But 90% of D&D battles happen in rooms, dungeons, small areas. And most spells, unless they have a range of touch, have a range of 30 feet, 60 feet. You're not going to be struggling with range spells most of the time. So I put this down low as not a bad effect, just unnecessary most of the time. For number 7, we have Careful Spell. Careful Spell is a point, 1 sorcery point, and you choose a number of creatures in the area of a spell that you cast. A number of creatures equal to your charisma modifier, so usually that's your whole party. Those creatures automatically succeed their saving throw against your spell. So if you have to drop a fireball on the party because they're surrounded, this means you can choose the party and they will automatically succeed their save. That's fine. It reduces the damage by half. I would have liked it if it had the evasion style feature where it reduces the damage, or it makes you automatically succeed your save, and if a spell says that you take half damage on a successful save, you take no damage. I would have preferred that, because that means you could literally just nuke the party with the same level of not care as an Evoker Wizard. Evoker Wizards have this power at level 2, where they can sculpt their spells around the party so that they don't hurt them. Careful Spell, you're still going to do half damage, you're just going to guarantee it's half damage. And for that reason, I'm gonna throw this at number 7. It's a good effect, it just doesn't do exactly what I hoped it would. Next, at number 6, we have Extended Spell. This is another 1 sorcery point cast, and it doubles a spell's time. So, if you've got a spell that lasts for a minute, it can last for 2 minutes. If you've got a spell that lasts for an hour, it can last for 2 hours. This has a maximum of 24, but the number of spells that last longer than 24 hours is pretty short. And mostly are utility-based spells that you would cast as big rituals. Even the more powerful spells that last for, 8 hours, like Aid, for example, you now make it last 16. So there's not that weird, is this going to stop working in the middle of the day thing. I'd use Extended Spell on Mage Armor, for example, if I knew I was going to have a long adventuring day. It saves you the spell slot of casting it again later on, or just forgetting. And I think that that's well worth it. Obviously, this isn't going to be a whole lot of help in combat, because most combats don't last that long. So extending an effect that would last a minute to 2 minutes isn't really worth it in a combat. And if it's an instantaneous spell, like a fireball, it's not going to make it last 2 rounds. It doesn't do anything to it. So, Extended Spell, decent pick for utility and for support-based purposes, but not something you're going to use all the time. Okay, now we're into the top 5, and these are the ones that actually can have significant effects on the game most of the time. Well, maybe not this next one. Number 5 on my list, Transmuted Spell. When you cast a spell that does damage, you can spend a sorcery point to change the damage type. So if you're casting Eldritch Blast, for example, it does force damage, you can spend a sorcery point to change it to acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, or thunder. This, I mean, Eldritch Blast is a bad example because that does force damage, which is better than all of those. But let's say you're casting Fireball. I use Fireball as an example a lot because it's a classic spell. There's a lot of creatures in the game that resist fire damage. So when you cast Fireball, you can spend a sorcery point to transmute it to Thunderball, or Poison Ball, or Lightning Ball, or Acid Ball. Pick one of the elemental types. And this means you're going to bypass resistances. So some of your more powerful spells that struggle with damage resistance, suddenly you don't have to worry that much about it. And for just 1 sorcery point per cast, I say that's a solid choice when you run into damage resistances. That's not as common as you might think, but considering Fireball is one of your more powerful spells, and fire is one of the most commonly resisted types, I say Transmuted Spell is worth taking if you're a blaster. You don't want damage resistance to be limiting your power. And Transmuted Spell is a good way to get around that. Okay, now we're into the good ones. Number 4 on my list, Subtle Spell. When you cast a spell, you have to use verbal, somatic, and material components depending on what spell it is. Subtle Spell, when you cast a spell, you spend a sorcery point, and you don't spend the verbal or somatic components. This means that if a spell doesn't have a material component, or the material component is just your arcane focus in your hand, you don't speak, and you don't make movements when you cast the spell. It just kind of happens. And this is especially nice if it doesn't use material components, because you don't even have to hold nothing. It just happens. This makes your spells impossible to see, which means that if you're casting a charm spell like Suggestion or Charm Person, the creature has no clue that you cast the spell. No one does. If you're casting an attack spell, it means it's not able to be counterspelled, because counterspell specifies you have to see someone casting a spell, and Subtle Spell stops that. And it also means that you don't have to have your hands free or be able to speak at all. So if you are blinded, bound, gagged with your hands cut off or tied up or whatever, you can still use a spell with Subtle Spell. So your sorcery points just kind of override all that. So in many, many ways, Subtle Spell can be very helpful, and I love this meta magic. And it's only 1 point per casting, so you can't argue with that. Now, at number 3, we have Empowered Spell. Empowered Spell is just 1 sorcery point, and when you roll the damage of a damaging spell, once again, I'll use Fireball as the example. That's 8d6 that you roll. Empowered Spell lets you re-roll the damage up to a number of dice equal to your Charisma modifier. So let's take Fireball. 8d6. By level 5, when you get Fireball, you're going to have probably an 18 in your Charisma, if not higher. So that's at least 4. So if you roll 8d6, and half of them are 1s and 2s, you can spend a sorcery point, grab those 4 dice, and re-roll them, potentially increasing the damage of the spell you just did several points. And because it's only 1 sorcery point, you can do this almost every time you cast a damaging spell, and it's really helpful when you're doing AoE. You're using a Fireball to just hit a bunch of enemies. You don't want to roll a bunch of 1s. You don't want to be doing 10 damage. You want to be doing 20 plus. So grab those 1s, spend a sorcery point, do more damage. It's a really, really good effect, and it honestly is my favorite damage-based meta magic. I would take this on any blaster, and would honestly take it on most sorcerers. Now, number 2. This is honestly my favorite meta magic. It's not the most powerful. Most powerful is number 1, but it's my favorite because it does something that no other meta magic does. It messes with action economy. Number 2 is Quickened Spell. Action economy is king in D&D. What you spend your action, your bonus action, your reaction, these are very valuable commodities. Quickened Spell states that when you cast a spell that takes an action, you can instead spend 2 sorcery points, it's a little pricey, and instead cast it as a bonus action. So this allows you to cast multiple spells in a round if you're spending one as a cantrip. There's a rule in D&D that if you use a bonus action to cast a leveled spell, the only other spell you can cast is a cantrip with a casting time of an action. But if you cast a spell as an action that's a cantrip, like Mind Sliver, for example, that gives a creature a penalty to saving throws. You can stack this by then quickening and bonus action casting a spell that requires a saving throw. One of my all-time favorite ways to do this is to Mind Sliver as your action, bonus action, cast Banishment, or Tasha's Mind Whip, or something like that. And then the creature has a penalty to their save, and you did that on your turn. There's no setup required. It just happens. And Quicken Spell allows that. There's so many different ways to mess with this, where you mix bonus action spell with action spell cantrip in one turn. And this is also amazing for Nova damage builds, where you're just burning all your resources to do a bunch of damage in one turn. Being able to cast a spell as a bonus action, leaving your action free for something else. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And is my favorite meta magic. Well, what's number 1? You already know. Number 1 is Twin Spell. Twin Spell costs a different amount of sorcery points, depending on what level of spell you use it on. It costs a sorcery point for every spell every level the spell is. So to cast it on a cantrip or a first level spell only costs 1 sorcery point. To use it on a 3rd level spell costs 3. To use it on a 5th level spell costs 5. And you could even twin a 9th level spell if you had it, but it would cost you 9 sorcery points to do it. How it works is this. The spell only works or a twin spell only works if it's used on a spell that targets a single creature and not self. So a spell that targets self, it doesn't work. A spell that targets multiple creatures, like a fireball, it won't work. It only works on spells that will shoot a single target. One of the classic picks for this one is Polymorph, because you can use Polymorph to transform your friends into powerful beasts or your enemies into little harmless beasts. Twin spell allows you to target a second creature. So twinning Polymorph means you can take two of your allies with the same casting, the same 4th level spell slot, and get two of them powered up, also letting you concentrate on 2 instances of the spell simultaneously. This also works for something like Suggestion. If you twin Suggestion, you can do it to 2 creatures at once. There are a lot of these spells that target a unique individual creature with every casting. Twinning them allows you to spread the love, or the damage, out significantly. Even it with something like a cantrip like Toll the Dead, it targets a single creature, or Firebolt, it targets a single creature. Now you can just, for 1 sorcery point, pew pew, twin that, effectively doubling your damage. And for the more powerful effects, like Polymorph, getting it off twice for 1 casting is worth the sorcery points, basically every time. It means that you can also double up on your concentration, and breaking the concentration mechanic is the fastest way to break D&D. Twin spell is overpowered. It is amazingly strong. It's expensive, but it's one of those metamagics that you don't care. This isn't like Heightened Spell, where the cost isn't worth it. The cost is absolutely worth it, and Twin Spell is by far the most powerful metamagic. I just don't like it because it's too powerful. I don't like using stuff that's that strong. That's why I like Quicken Spell. It's the best metamagic that isn't overpowered. It's still very strong, though. But Twin Spell is, for sure, the #1 metamagic in D&D 5e. If you want to make the most powerful sorcerer you possibly can, always take this spell. You will not regret it. Or this metamagic. So those are your top 10 metamagics. Pick your favorites, grab one of the powerful ones, one of the thematic ones, and if you want to experiment with the lower level ones, there's no problem. I mean, Seeking Spell and Heightened Spell I don't think are really worth it, but you might disagree. Pick whatever works for your sorcerer. Just make sure you grab one of the top level ones, because they're going to come in handy time and time again, I promise. This has been the Relaxed Fantasy Review. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe down below. Have a look for the join button down there, and keep your eyes peeled for more lists like these coming down the line soon. Have a good one, my friends.